Medicine at George Washington University. I'm also the medical director of the Metabolic Medical Institute for Education. These two organizations have gone into partnership to develop a very exciting graduate-level program on integrative medicine. And today we have an exciting guest who has recently joined the faculty at GW, Dr. Ritchie Shoemaker. He has done seminal work on the role of biotoxins in chronic inflammation and beginning to articulate why people get sick and how they get sick from important and common exposures that are often overlooked. His journey has been very, very important, and the work that he's done, I think, will become a major contribution to practice of medicine. So thank you, Dr. Shoemaker, for joining us today. I'm delighted to have you involved in our curriculum.
Well, and I'm delighted to be speaking with you. This is an important time in my career. We are turning the corner on some elements of research that I waited 7 years for, and they are here now.
So, Dr. Shoemaker, tell me a little bit about how you got into this in the first place. What happened years ago in your practice of medicine that led you down this other path of looking at the immune system in a new and novel way?
I think I'm a good bit older than you, and I remember the Pfiesteria problem in Chesapeake Bay like it was yesterday, but it was 1996 and 1997. I was in, I guess maybe you might want to say the right place at the right time, but the outbreak of this unusual toxin-mediated illness caused by a dinoflagellate, an algae-like creature that turns out has been in the Chesapeake Bay for a long time, but no one ever knew it was, has kind of changed my life and my career in ways I could not have predicted. The little sleepy town of Pocomoke on the eastern shore was the epicenter of a significant outbreak that affected, in the end, at least 22 estuaries in the Chesapeake Bay. Became a politically controversial subject, and the public health decisions were a little silly looking back on it. But when I saw people sickened by exposure, simply being exposed to aerosols off the Pocomoke River and some of the other ones nearby, these people that were working or recreating on the water had a multi-system, multi-symptom illness that no one had ever seen before, came out of the blue, didn't go away on its own, and didn't show any abnormalities in standard labs that we would expect to find. And what was this? How could so many people be so sick and not have any evidence of why they were sick? Well, unraveling this puzzle led to finding the importance of genetic susceptibility and the importance of innate immune inflammatory regulators, flame hormones like MSH and VIP, and then a whole series of compounds representing inflammation from innate immune responses, and more jargon terms like C4A and TGF-beta1 and MMP9, compounds that most people haven't heard of. And yet there they were in stark black and white presentation of saying what was wrong and then learning to fix what was wrong led to, finally, resolution of these complex illnesses that we now know to be chronic inflammatory response syndromes. And the more we look at the nature of how this disease nebula light years away. And that's really analogous to what's happened in this field.
Mm-hmm. So we're able to look farther and look more deeply, peer more acutely into our patients' physiology and beginning to understand sort of the complexity of this immune response and finally have some evidence. You know, a lot of labels have been thrown around in medicine like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia that up until recently we've been told there are no biological markers that go along with those labels. But what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, is that with a better understanding of this part of the immune system in particular, we're finally beginning to uncover the biological mechanisms that underlie probably a number of disease states that we most likely mischaracterized.
Over this past several days, we had a conference of physicians who were certified in my protocol by the website survivingmold.com come together on the Eastern Shore for just 2 weeks of intensive discussion. And the theme was that we must put objective parameters on our opinions. We may not guess, we may not make assumptions, but that now that we have a genomic and proteomic basis, patients and physicians alike don't have to settle for diseases that are made up, quite frankly, to get the patient out the door, like fibromyalgia always was.
Right. Right. And so tell me a little bit more about these markers that you've identified, these proteomic markers. You know, we've talked in other situations about, yes, they're an indication of an active innate immune system. But what was striking to me, and you've made this comment several times, is that they become a problem in and of themselves. They have the potential to degrade the blood-brain barrier and injure key areas in the nervous system, and in particular the brain. Tell me a little bit more about that.
The compounds that have been shown to independently injure the blood-brain barrier, and I mentioned some of the jargon acronyms, TGF-beta-1 or transforming growth factor beta-1, and vascular endothelial growth factor and C4A, all have been known in good, high-level, published, peer-reviewed literature to make the blood-brain barrier leaky. But until our paper was published in June of 2014, there was no correlate between having these abnormalities in blood and showing injury to particular areas of the brain that can be imaged with a computer software program that is a volumetric program, FDA certified, FDA cleared since 2007. And now that we can take an objective MRI program and show where the cognitive issues come from in folks with prior diagnoses like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, and how many people were called depressed and how many people were called stressed. But now we know the disease really was in their head. It was an objective interstitial edema and then atrophy of gray matter structures that have not been reported in such a combination ever before. So the correlation of symptoms and exposures followed by lab abnormalities and then objective parameters of pulmonary artery pressures and exercise, oxygen consumption at rest and in exercise, and then this brain injury has given rise to a whole new series of treatments that are targeted to the inflammatory abnormalities, and when you correct those, the rest of the illness goes away. The excitement is that we now can show that genomic abnormalities can be corrected as well, and this is big. This is big.
It's a real breakthrough, and when I think about you know, the basic architecture of your treatment protocol, it seems to me, and this is how I sort of artificially cut it up, that there's sort of three components in my mind. One is to recognize and deal with the initial trigger or insult and to determine whether or not the trigger is still around or maybe it's occurred in the past. The second is to handle and turn off key elements of the immune system over time. And then the third is doing the cleanup, which is the brain itself, and working to repair the residual damage. That third piece, for me, is so exciting, and that is to say, up until now, we never had clinical interventions that showed a demonstrated ability to repair an injured brain. But I know that you have some tricks up your sleeve, as it were, for that last piece, and that is dealing with the architectural changes of a brain that literally has been injured because of this inflammatory state. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do in particular for repair of the brain.
Our approaches to treatment parallel the very elegant breakdown that you gave in step 1, step 2, and step 3. You know, I've micromanaged into 12 steps, but I think you have summarized very precisely the approaches that we've got to take. The issue, back to your other very prescient question of how do we know how to go about fixing brain injury to isolated gray matter nuclei? Well, we have to know it's there first. And quite frankly, until 2 years ago, I didn't know that there was such a beast. And it just took time to get a handle on collecting data that was replicated in multiple sites that really showed that these treatment protocols will take the basic mechanisms, clear the swelling that's diffuse, 8 of 9 main brain regions. We call that interstitial or between cell swelling or edema. It's not something you can see on a regular MRI, which will show vasogenic or macroscopic edema. This is microscopic. So what we're then looking at is that's the first element to clear, but having a chance to watch brain-to-brain cell interaction remodel and be recreated is where the atrophy correction comes from. So it's all based on knowing more precisely what's wrong and then having targeted therapies to correct the gene basis of these illnesses.
Well, you know, from my perspective, with some of the work that I've done with regard to the stress response, which ends up in and of itself being damaging to the brain too, and I think more and more we're realizing the impact that stress has on the central nervous system, and that under certain circumstances the brain can be permanently injured. What you're talking about is really truly a breakthrough in neurobiology and clinical medicine, and in some ways it's a holy grail, and that is to say, you know, for a long time we thought if the brain is injured, it's injured, and there's not much we can do once it passed a certain point of damage. But what you're saying is that now more than ever there are new tools in place clinically to deal with those injuries. And I know there are a lot of clinicians and researchers who would be incredibly excited across many medical domains for this particular issue because, quite frankly, there are no pharmaceuticals on the market that do what you're talking about.
That's right. That's right. And that's why as we move forward with our plans for publication, we need to be careful to not bring out data prematurely. You know, if you watch the news and hear about the breakthrough in leukemia and the breakthrough in this and Alzheimer's, that the real issue is that a reasonable, prudent physician/scientist will say, well, we hope in 5 to 10 years to have something available on the market. I guess I'm not reasonable and prudent because I hope to have it out in 10 weeks.
Well, I would be anxious to see that happen. And on that note, I'd like to close our discussion and, you know, just say once again how delighted we are to have you involved in MMI and at the upcoming George Washington University weekend, and that the work that you're doing is incredibly important, and that, you know, I'm sure that the learners who attend will be extraordinarily grateful and even likely blown away by the insights that that you're going to provide. That weekend will be October 31st to November 2nd in Miami. You can find details at the Metabolic Medical Institute website. And Dr. Shoemaker, thank you once again for all of the work that you're doing. I am very, very pleased that you're joining the GW faculty and looking forward to your lecture at the end of the month.
Well, I am as well. It's really too bad that you've booked the meeting in such a nice place to go visit. you know, we're going to be starting a wood stove and staying warm and here in Pocomoke, and just having to go lecture in some place with South Beach right around the corner is really rough.
Yeah, we had a hard time choosing Miami as a location. So I will see you in 2 weeks, and thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated.
Great to talk to you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You